I never imagined that betrayal could come dressed as love. The call that changed everything came on a bright morning, the kind that should have felt safe. Instead, it shattered the quiet rhythm of my life. One sentence, spoken too easily, cut deeper than years of silence. I was not welcome, not in their home, not at my own grandson's celebration. That was the moment something inside me cracked, but also began to wake pain. I've learned, has a strange way of clearing your sight. It forces you to see who you are when love forgets to recognize you. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The rain in Portland never really stops. It changes texture instead. Sometimes a mist that hangs like silk over the rooftops. Sometimes a steady whisper that fills the gutters and makes the sidewalks shine. I have lived with it long enough to know its moods. Most mornings, I watch it through the window of Hawthorne Beans, the small cafe 2 blocks from my house. I sit in the corner by the plant shelf, a cup of dark roast warming my palms, and listen to people talk about traffic, real estate, or dogs. I do not join in. My conversation is mostly with the rain. I am 58, a retired nurse, and my back still reminds me of every night I lifted patients who were heavier than hope. For 32 years, I worked in the intensive care unit at Providence Medical Center, holding the hands of strangers while their hearts forgot how to beat. Retirement was not planned. It arrived like an unwanted visitor after an injury that refused to heal. Yet, I am still a nurse inside. I volunteer twice a week at the church clinic, measuring blood pressure for the elderly who come mostly for someone to talk to. I live alone in a small 1-story house near Mount Tabor. The front yard is a patch of hydrangeas and herbs. My car, a silver Subaru Outback older than some of my neighbors' children, wait faithfully by the curb. I drive it everywhere because I dislike flying. On the road, I can stop whenever I need. The sky offers no such mercy. My husband, Carlos, has been gone for 15 years. His heart failed quietly one November night, leaving a silence that the television could not fill. Our son Daniel was still in college. Then I poured everything into helping him finish school. Extra shifts, skipped vacations, a refinance on the house. When he graduated and moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, I told myself the distance was progress. Parents are supposed to raise their children to leave. Daniel married Brooke Whitman, a marketing professional whose smile photographs better than it lasts. She is stylish, quick-witted, and confident in the way people are when they have never had to start over from nothing. They have a boy, Leo, who just turned 7. I know his face mostly from social media. Brooke posts pictures of every haircut, every soccer trophy, every new toy. I save them to a folder labeled grandson, as if naming it could make it mine. My days follow a rhythm I built out of habit and quiet survival. Morning coffee at the cafe, grocery shopping at the co-op on Division Street, Saturdays at the Portland Market for bread and wildflowers, Sunday afternoons at Powell's City of Books, where the smell of paper feels almost like company. I end each day with a walk through the neighborhood, raincoat zipped, the city lights blurred into watercolor. It is not exciting, but it is mine. Still, there are cracks in the calm. Holidays pass with video calls that last 5 minutes. Packages I send arrive without reply. When I ask about visiting, Daniel says work is hectic. Brooke says Leo has school. I tell myself they mean well, but a part of me has started to flinch at the sound of the phone. There is a particular ache in waiting for someone who no longer remembers to include you. Sometimes at night, I dream of standing before a locked door. I can hear laughter on the other side, but the key in my hand keeps changing shape. When I wake, the house feels too large for one heartbeat. I turn on the lamp, open my photo album, and look at Daniel at 6 years old, missing a front tooth, smiling under a maple tree heavy with red leaves. I whisper, maybe next year will be better. Outside, the rain answers softly against the window, as if it knows that hope, like weather, never really stops, only pauses long enough for us to breathe. If you're still watching and finding this story intriguing, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 2 and see how everything starts to unravel. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, just as the rain began to blur the window of my kitchen. Daniel's name lit up my phone screen. I almost dropped the dish towel in surprise. It had been weeks since his last call. His voice, when it came, was smooth and careful, like someone reading from a script. He said Leo's 7th birthday was coming up, that they were planning a small gathering, and that I should come if I wanted. I told him of course I would. He paused, said he would send me the address, and hung up before I could ask about flights or hotels. The call lasted less than 4 minutes, but I replayed it for hours in my head, searching for warmth that was not there. The next day, I began preparing for the trip. I decided to drive to Arizona, 16 hours from Portland, because flying has never suited me. The road feels safer than the sky. I packed oatmeal pecan cookies, baked the night before with Leo's small hands in mind, and wrapped a scrapbook I had spent weeks assembling. Each page held photographs of Daniel as a child, his first bike, his high school graduation, a picture of him asleep on my shoulder. I added a few blank pages at the end, hoping Leo might one day fill them. Before leaving, I checked the weather. Portland was wrapped in drizzle, but the forecast for Scottsdale promised pure sun. It felt symbolic. Though I could not tell whether it meant healing or exposure, I drove south, following the long gray ribbon of highway past Salem and Eugene, past fields of fir trees thinning into open grasslands. I stopped at gas stations for coffee that tasted of cardboard, at diners that smelled of fried onions and old music. Somewhere near Redding, I caught myself smiling. Maybe this trip would fix everything. The Arizona border arrived with a slap of light so strong it felt personal. The air shimmered, the horizon bleached. Scottsdale rose out of the desert like a mirage of success. Golf courses, clean sidewalks, houses painted the same careful shade of beige. When I reached Daniel's Street, I slowed the car, reading the house numbers twice. The neighborhood was too quiet. My heart began to drum against my ribs. I parked by the curb, stepped out, and smoothed the wrinkles from my dress. The cookie tin felt suddenly heavy. I walked to the door and rang the bell. Footsteps approached. Quick and decisive, Brooke opened it. Her smile was bright but fixed in place, like a mask that had forgotten its purpose. She said how nice it was that I came, and that it was a small family event this year, very intimate. Her perfume stung my throat. Daniel appeared behind her, eyes darting between us. I waited for him to say something kind, but he only said, "Mom, maybe it is better if you go. Brooke just wants to keep things simple." I nodded, because speaking would have broken something. I said I understood, turned, and walked back to the car. The sound of children laughing came from inside the house. My fingers trembled as I started the engine, but I drove away slowly, as if speed would turn pain into anger. I checked into a roadside motel near Pima Freeway. The room smelled of bleach and old air conditioning. On the bed, I placed the cookies and scrapbook side by side, both unopened. I texted, "Happy birthday, Leo," then turned the phone face down. Outside, the desert wind howled softly against the window. The headlights from passing trucks streaked the curtains with moving gold. I lay still, listening to the sound of engines and wondering at what exact moment I had stopped being part of the word family. The silence of the motel was a kind of truth I had been avoiding for years. Hope had followed me across 1,000 miles, but it did not check in with me that night. If this part has kept you hooked so far, drop a quick comment with number 2 to show you're following along. Now, let's move to point number 3 and uncover what truly begins to shake their world. The phone rang at 1:47 in the morning. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, so the sound cut through the dark like an alarm. My first thought was that someone had died. I reached for the phone, my fingers stiff from sleep. It was Daniel. The second I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. He spoke fast, tripping over his words, his tone more desperate than affectionate. He said he was in trouble with a real estate deal in Arizona, that the project had gone wrong, and that he needed $65,000 to pay a contractor before he was sued. I listened, sitting on the edge of my bed with the lamp off, watching the pale outline of the window frame. It was not the first time my son had called me after midnight. He kept talking, explaining how the market had shifted, how an investor had backed out, how the paperwork was more complicated than he expected. I tried to follow, but the details tangled together. I asked simple questions. Who was the contractor? Did he have a contract? When was the payment due? His answers were fog. He said soon, tomorrow, maybe next week. His voice cracked when he said, "Mom, please, you are the only one I can trust." That word, trust, landed like a stone. I wanted to believe him. For a few moments I did. I thought of the nights I had carried him to bed when he was small, the way his hand used to clutch my sleeve even in sleep. But behind his plea, I heard calculation. I asked for the paperwork, the numbers, anything on record. He promised to send them in the morning. Something in his tone told me he would not. When the call ended, I did not lie back down. I turned on the lamp and stared at the framed photo on my nightstand. It was from his wedding in Sedona, all sun and sandstone. I remembered being placed at the third table, far from the couple, while Brooke's friends filled the front rows. That day had felt like being gently erased. Now, the same hand that had guided me away from the table was reaching back, not for love, but for rescue. I opened my laptop and checked my savings account. The numbers were small but sacred, the result of 3 decades of double shifts, skipped vacations, and cold dinners in hospital cafeterias. I could help him, yes, but I could not afford to start over again. I thought of my patients, how I used to tell families that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let the heart stop fighting. Maybe that rule applied here too. As I was about to close the computer, the phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. "Brooke wants to say something." Then her voice came through the speaker, polished and sharp. She said it was family money, that we did not need to make it formal with documents. I said nothing, though inside me something snapped, a quiet thread that had held for years. When she hung up, the silence in the room felt heavy with truth. I opened my diary, the one with the leather cover that Carlos had given me. On a blank page, I wrote down the time, the amount, and Daniel's words. Then I added a single sentence beneath them. "My son sees me as a solution, not as a person." The pen left a dent in the paper. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and listened to the clock tick its way toward morning. Each click felt like a judgment, a reminder that love without boundaries turns to debt. I lay awake until the first light touched the curtains, knowing something between us had finally broken. If you're still here and the tension is pulling you in, type number 3 in the comments so I know you're feeling it too. Now, let's head into point number 4 and watch how the pressure keeps building. Morning arrived like a dull echo, light spreading slowly through the blinds. I had slept little. My mind kept circling back to Daniel's call, to the trembling in his voice, and to the sharpness that had followed when I asked for proof. The city was still damp from the night's rain, but I felt colder than the air outside. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote a list of steps on a notepad. Step 1, verify his story. Step 2, demand documentation. Step 3, protect what remains of my savings. It was the nurse in me taking over again, the one who needed order, charts, facts, and pulse readings before deciding what to do next. By mid-morning, I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. His tone rushed. I asked for the contractor's name, any receipts, or a copy of the agreement that had gone wrong. He said he was pulling the files together, that he just needed more time. The explanation slid around the edges of my questions like oil on water. I heard Brooke's voice somewhere in the background, clipped and impatient, asking if he was still on that call. The words did not sound like concern. They sounded like ownership. I took a breath, wrote down the time and date of the call, and thanked him for speaking to me. After hanging up, I opened my laptop. I found a website that provided templates for family loan agreements, printed one, and began to fill in the blanks with Daniel's name. It felt almost clinical, the way a consent form would look before a medical procedure. I wrote a polite email outlining the terms, written documentation, repayment plan, and a meeting with a financial advisor. I explained that it was for clarity, not mistrust. My hands were steady as I typed. For once, I was not reacting from guilt or fear, but from reason. The reply came an hour later. Daniel's message was short and defensive, insisting that I was overcomplicating things. 15 minutes after that, Brooke sent a separate email. Her words were smooth and cutting. She wrote that family did not need contracts, that trust should be enough. The irony of that line made me laugh. Though the sound came out brittle, I did not reply. I simply closed the laptop and stared out the window, watching the street glisten under a thin drizzle. If trust had been enough, I would not be sitting alone drawing up contracts for my own son. As the afternoon settled, I opened my inbox again, searching through old messages from Daniel. Something strange caught my attention. The log showed recent sign-ins from an address in Scottsdale. I scrolled deeper and found that certain filters had been added to my account. Emails with subjects like Leo's school, birthday, or family photos were set to automatically forward to another address before being deleted. My breath caught. The rule had been created a year ago, on a date that matched a photo Brooke had posted from her new home office. I stared at the screen, a cold weight spreading through me. It was not neglect that had kept me out of their lives. It was design. I took screenshots, printed them, and placed them in a folder beside my financial notes. The proof felt heavy in my hands, more solid than any promise I had heard lately. I did not call Daniel. Instead, I put on my coat and walked along the wet sidewalks until the rain blurred my thoughts into silence. The city smelled of cedar and gasoline, of endings that might still lead somewhere. By the time I returned home, I knew something had changed. I was done pleading for space in their world. I would face the truth, even if it left me standing alone. I whispered to the empty room, "If love means blindness, I am ready to see." If this story is resonating and you can't look away, write number 4 below to stay connected. Now it's time to move forward to point number 5, where the choices start to carry real consequences. The days after I discovered the email manipulation felt like walking through fog that refused to lift. Every sound in the house seemed too sharp. The kettle whistle, the creak of the floorboards, The ticking of the clock, I tried to distract myself with errands and volunteer work, but the thought would not fade. They had erased me on purpose. I printed every screenshot, every timestamp, every sign-in record, and placed them in a binder with other neat labels. It was not anger that moved my hands, but a kind of sterile calm, the same one I used to feel before delivering bad news to a patient. When the binder was finished, I booked a flight to Arizona. For the first time in 15 years, I did not choose the safety of driving. Fear had kept me grounded long enough. The plane cut through blue sky, leaving Portland's clouds behind like smoke. When I stepped out at Sky Harbor Airport, the heat struck me like a confession. Dry, brilliant, impossible to ignore. I rented a car, drove to the same motel I had stayed in weeks before, and checked in under the same name. The room was identical. Faded carpet, humming air conditioner, the faint smell of chlorine. Only I was different. I laid the binder on the desk and rehearsed what I would say. I would not cry. I would not beg. I would present the truth and watch them choose who they really were. The next morning, I went to Daniel's office unannounced. The building was glass and steel, too large for what I remembered of my son's business. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and ambition. His assistant looked startled but polite and ushered me to his door. When Daniel saw me, his eyes widened, then narrowed. I placed the binder on his desk and opened it to the first page, login histories, screenshots, and the filters that had deleted my messages. His hands twitched as he flipped through the papers. He tried to smile, but the edges of it cracked. He said he had known Brooke had done something small to manage communication, but he had not wanted to make it a fight. The words landed heavier than any insult. Silence is a betrayal that sounds like love, until it breaks. I asked him whether he had read any of my letters, whether he had wondered why I stopped writing about Leo's milestones. He looked away. The answer was already there. The door opened before I could speak again. Brooke entered, heels clicking, voice too bright. She asked what this was about. I told her. She laughed softly and said that boundaries were important, that some people needed to let go of control. Her words tasted like ice. Daniel said my name once, gently, as if I were a fragile thing, and asked me to lower my voice because clients were nearby. I stood very still, the heat rising in my face. The binder opened between us like a wound. I told them they had erased me from my own family and that I would not disappear quietly again. My voice trembled only once. Then I turned and walked out. Through the glass doors, I could see their reflections arguing, Daniel gesturing, Brooke crossing her arms. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. I sat in the car for a long time, shaking but steady, watching the building shimmer under the heat. Somewhere between grief and calm, I realized I felt lighter. I started the engine and drove away, the desert stretching open before me. In the rearview mirror, my own reflection looked back, not softened by illusion, not aged by sorrow, but clear. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman staring back. When the plane descended into Portland, the clouds looked soft enough to swallow sound. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the silver wing cut through the mist. For the first time in months, I did not feel the need to speak. The city greeted me with its familiar gray quiet, the streets wet, the air heavy with pine. My suitcase rolled behind me like a reluctant shadow. At home, I unpacked slowly. I placed the binder of evidence on the kitchen table, its edges sharp against the wood. It sat there for days, a silent companion reminding me that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. My friends from the church clinic noticed a difference in me. They said I looked lighter, though my eyes seemed far away. I smiled, told them I had simply been traveling. They did not ask where. I returned to my volunteering, measuring blood pressure, offering small talk, pretending my heart had not been rearranged. Each night I wrote in my diary, trying to name the strange calm that had replaced anger. It was not forgiveness. It was something quieter, like a wound that stops bleeding but still aches when the weather changes. A week later, an email arrived from my bank. It was an offer for a free consultation about protecting seniors from financial exploitation. I stared at the screen for a long time. I could expose Daniel and Brooke, report the manipulation, perhaps even press charges for fraud. The thought pulsed in my chest like a warning. I imagined the headlines, the shame, the conversations Leo would overhear at school. I opened my diary and drew 2 columns. On the left, I wrote justice. On the right, peace. The list under justice was long, filled with righteous anger and satisfaction. Under peace, there was only one line, sleep again. I closed the notebook and went to bed. The next afternoon, my old colleague Nancy appeared at my door, holding a paper bag of muffins. She had always been blunt in the way nurses often are. Over coffee, she told me that Brooke's marketing firm was already under investigation for unethical contracts. Their reputation was unraveling without my help. Nancy said I should secure my finances, but she also said something that stayed with me. Silence can be power when you own it. For the first time, I believed it. That night, I wrote a letter to Daniel. I told him about the nights I had worked double shifts so he could go to college, about the house I had almost lost, about the pride that had turned to worry. I told him I knew the truth about the emails, that Brooke's cruelty had not surprised me, but his silence had. I slipped the first page of the binder into the envelope and sealed it. Then I held it over the sink, tore it into strips, and watched the pieces fall. The act felt like breathing after holding it too long. I burned the rest in the fireplace, the smoke curling up the chimney like a small private confession. In the days that followed, I made changes. I updated my will, closed the joint accounts, and moved a portion of my savings to the community clinic that had kept so many people alive. I signed up to teach a weekly class on basic health care for seniors. The binder remained on the shelf, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that I had survived it. On the evening it began to rain again. I stood by the window listening to the soft percussion of drops on glass. The city was washed clean in silver light. I whispered into the quiet, "Peace is not forgiveness, it is freedom." And for the first time, I believed my own words. If you're still with me and this journey has you thinking about what you do, comment number 6 below to let me know. Now let's continue to chapter 7 and face the weight of what follows. 3 months passed in a silence that at first felt unbearable and later became almost sacred. The phone stopped ringing. The inbox stayed empty. The ache of waiting, once sharp, dulled into something steady, like a scar after healing mornings returned to their rhythm. Coffee steaming beside the window, the city waking in shades of gray. The absence of Daniel's voice settled into the corners of the house, but it no longer demanded to be filled. I began each day not by checking my messages, but by breathing, reminding myself that peace sometimes sounds like nothing at all. At the community clinic, I found myself staying later than usual. The new volunteers were younger, full of nervous energy and questions about procedures I had performed for decades. I taught them how to listen to a patient's pulse properly, how to notice the tremor in a hand before it drops a cup. Their curiosity anchored me. I organized a small campaign about blood pressure awareness for seniors, made posters, even gave a short speech. It was the first time in years I had spoken in front of a group without my voice shaking. The applause was soft but real. It felt like being seen again, this time for something I had built myself. One morning, I received a letter from a patient named Clara, an elderly woman with arthritis who had come in weekly for blood pressure checks. Her handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged. She wrote, "You remind me that kindness can be quiet and still save lives." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal beside the page where I had taped the last ashes from the letter to Daniel. The contrast struck me. One burned, one preserved, both necessary. A week later, Nancy arrived at the clinic with a newspaper folded under her arm. Her face carried that mix of sympathy and news that cannot be avoided. She said Brooks' marketing firm had been shut down after an official investigation confirmed unethical practices. There were fines, lawsuits, and names in print. Daniel's name appeared once as a minor business associate. I read the article only once. My hands did not tremble. I folded the paper and slipped it into the recycling bin. No satisfaction came, only a quiet, exhausted pity. Justice had arrived on its own, and it looked nothing like victory. That night, an email appeared in my inbox from Daniel. The subject line was my name. The message was short and careful. He said he was sorry for what had happened, that he had let things spiral, that Leo had asked why Grandma never visited. He ended with, "I am not asking for forgiveness, just understanding." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. His words carried a kind of humility, but also distance, the way someone writes when they hope for closure without facing consequence. I closed the laptop without replying. My hand hovered over the power button for a moment longer than necessary. Later, I walked through Mount Tabor Park. The path was slick from an early drizzle, and the lampposts cast halos of gold against the mist. The air smelled of cedar and damp soil. Each step sounded deliberate, as if the earth itself was listening. I thought about the word understanding, how heavy it was, how easily it could be mistaken for surrender. I realized I might never forgive Daniel fully, and that it did not make me cruel. Forgiveness is not an act, but a direction. One you walk toward slowly. Without a map, when I reached the top of the hill, the city stretched below, lights blinking through the fog. I whispered, "He may never know the whole truth, but I do. And that is enough." The rain answered softly, a steady applause only I could hear. The seasons shifted quietly. By late spring, the air in Portland carried the scent of rain-soaked earth and budding lilacs. My days no longer felt like something to endure. They had form again, rhythm, a pulse that belonged only to me. I taught health classes twice a week at the community center, and on Thursdays, I joined a small group of retirees at Powell's Books to talk about novels and drink weak coffee. The conversations were gentle, the laughter unforced. None of us pretended to have perfect families. That honesty bound us faster than sympathy ever could. At home, I began making changes that once would have felt too drastic. I painted the living room a pale yellow, soft enough to hold the morning light. I replaced the heavy curtains with the gauzy ones that swayed whenever the window cracked open. Half the furniture went to charity, including the dining table that had sat empty for years. The house, for so long a shrine to what used to be, became livable again. When I walked through the rooms now, the silence felt companionable rather than accusatory. The clinic remained my anchor. My small health workshop for seniors grew larger each month. People came not only for checkups, but to talk, to share stories about medications, loneliness, grandchildren, and sometimes grief. One afternoon, a representative from a local nonprofit visited. She had heard about the workshops and asked if I would help expand them into a mobile health program for low-income neighborhoods, a senior wellness caravan. The proposal made my pulse quicken with something I had not felt in years: purpose. It would mean leadership, logistics, responsibility. For a moment I hesitated, wondering if I was too old to begin something new. Then I thought of all the people who had believed the same thing and stayed still. I told her yes. That night, I sat at my desk and sketched out ideas for the caravan: routes, supplies, volunteers, sponsorships. The lamplight spilled across my notes, bright and ordinary. It struck me that rebuilding one's life rarely arrives in revelation. It happens through small, deliberate acts, repeated until they add up to faith. A week later, an envelope arrived from Arizona. The handwriting on the front was uneven and childlike. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a drawing of stick figures under a wide yellow sun. One figure had gray hair, labeled Grandma. My throat tightened. There was no note from Daniel or Brooke, no apology, only the drawing, bright with innocence. I laughed, then cried until the tears felt clean. I framed the picture and placed it on the shelf beside my collection of medical journals. It belonged there, a testament to what survives, not what breaks. In early summer, the hydrangeas began to bloom again. Their petals opened wide, soft blues and purples catching the light. I spent an afternoon pruning the garden, my hands steady, the soil damp beneath my nails. When the rain started, I did not move inside. I let it fall on my face, cool and familiar. The world smelled of renewal, sharp and alive. That night, before bed, I opened my diary and wrote, "Sometimes love returns in smaller shapes. You recognize it not by who gives it, but by who you become after surviving it." I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and sat in the quiet, certain that I had finally come home to myself. If this story has stirred something in you and you want to see how it all comes together, drop number 8 in the comments to stay with me. Now let's move toward the ending that will bring everything full circle. A year passed quietly, the kind of year that does not announce itself but leaves traces. New habits, deeper breaths, mornings that feel lighter. Portland's skies remained gray, but I had learned to see warmth in the silver light. The senior wellness caravan had grown beyond anything I imagined. 2 vans now traveled the city each week, visiting low-income neighborhoods to offer free health checks and workshops. Volunteers called me Director Marion, a title that once would have embarrassed me, but now simply fit. Purpose had stitched itself back into the fabric of my life, not loudly, but firmly. The rhythm of my days no longer wavered. I woke before dawn, drank coffee on the porch, and watched the hydrangeas nod in the breeze. The house had settled into peace, no longer a monument to loss, but a place that held light. My neighbors waved when I walked by. The mail carrier stopped to ask about the clinic. These small exchanges built a kind of belonging I had never expected to find again. In early spring, I was invited to speak at a city health forum. The topic was emotional resilience among seniors, and when my name was called, I walked to the podium without fear. I spoke about aging not as decline, but as a series of adjustments, the way the heart learns to heal itself quietly. The audience, mostly gray-haired and kind-eyed, listened with stillness that felt like respect. When they applauded, I realized the sound did not fill a void. It simply met me where I stood. I was no longer performing for anyone's approval, not even my own. One afternoon, I received an email from Daniel. It had no greeting, just an image attached. Leo holding a blue ribbon in front of a science fair project. The caption read, "He wanted you to see this." My breath caught. The boy's smile looked so much like Daniel's. At that age, it was almost cruel. Yet, instead of pain, I felt a slow warmth spread through me. I printed the photo and placed it beside Leo's drawing on the shelf. No reply seemed necessary. Some gestures are complete in their silence. A few weeks later, Daniel called. His voice was lower, less sure. He said he would be in Portland for work and asked if we could meet for coffee. I hesitated but agreed. We met at a small cafe near the river. He looked older, lines of worry carved around his mouth. Our conversation was polite, careful. He thanked me for staying myself. The phrase puzzled me at first, then settled in like truth. He paid for the coffee and left before I could decide whether to hug him. Watching him walk away, I realized that closure is not a door shutting. It is learning to live comfortably in the space it leaves behind. That evening, the rain returned, soft and familiar. I walked home through puddles, the city glowing faintly in the mist. At my desk, I opened my diary and wrote, "Some stories do not need perfect endings. Peace itself can be the reward." I closed the book and turned off the lamp. The frame drawing and photo caught the last of the light, small proofs that love, even fractured, can still find its way home. Another spring arrived, gentle and slow, as if the world had finally learned to move at my pace. The hydrangeas in my garden bloomed higher this year. Their petals heavy with color, I tended to them every morning, trimming what had withered, coaxing the new buds into light. The garden had become a mirror of my own life, proof that pruning does not mean loss, only preparation for growth. When I stood among the flowers, I felt the quiet certainty of someone who has survived the worst and chosen, deliberately, to stay kind. The days passed without drama. I continued my work with the Senior Wellness Caravan, though I spent more time mentoring than leading. New volunteers arrived, full of ideas, and I watched them with a patient pride I had begun writing as well. Short essays for a wellness journal about recovery, forgiveness, and setting boundaries. The first time I saw my name printed under the title, Healing at Any Age, I smiled not out of vanity, but because it felt like planting another seed. The words I once kept locked in a diary now moved out into the world, steady and unafraid. One afternoon, a young volunteer named Elise lingered after class. Her eyes were red from crying. She told me she had not spoken to her mother in 2 years. That pride and hurt had built a wall neither could cross. I listened, recognizing the tremor in her voice. When she finished, I said quietly, "Love does not end when people disappoint us. It changes shape. Sometimes distance is its truest form." She nodded, and though I could not fix her pain, I could share the map of surviving it. I had learned that compassion is strongest when it is no longer fueled by need. That evening, I walked along the river where I had once met Daniel. The water caught the last of the daylight, turning silver at the edges. I carried a small envelope in my pocket. Inside was a pressed hydrangea petal and a short note for Leo. It read, "You are loved from every distance." I mailed it at the small post office near the bridge, knowing Daniel would see it first. Still, I wanted Leo to grow up with the idea that love can be steady even when unseen. When I returned home, the air smelled of rain. I opened the window and let the wind move through the curtains. On my desk sat the framed drawing of stick figures and the photograph of Leo's ribbon. I opened my diary one last time and wrote, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without letting pain take the lead." Then I closed the book and placed it beside the frames outside. The rain began, soft as applause against the window. I whispered to no one, "Some storms come to wash us clean. The rest we learn to walk through." The sound of water filled the house, and for the first time in years, I felt no need to turn away. In the quiet stretch after pain, we often learn that peace is not something we chase. It is what remains once we stop resisting what has already happened. Life will break and bend us, sometimes through the hands of those we once trusted most. Yet from those fractures comes light, and from endings, the chance to begin again. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It simply teaches us how to carry it with grace. Every storm, however fierce, eventually clears enough sky for us to see ourselves anew. Thank you for walking through this journey. If the story touched something within you, if it made you think, remember, or breathe differently, Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections matter here. Do not forget to subscribe and follow for more stories about strength, healing, and the quiet courage of starting over.